Transfiguration, the incident that we read, the event that we read today in the gospel reading, has a very interesting place in church calendar because it has a fixed day, 6th of August, but it can also be celebrated on the Sunday before the Lent. We didn't do that because I prefer fixed day. But then, in case we didn't read it on any other day, the reading can be also read in the second Sunday of Lent. So when you have these 2 days, can be celebrated in 2 days, and maybe on the second Sunday of Lent as well, you kind of get the idea that people who just work on this church calendar really want us to read this story about Transfiguration. There must be some significance about this. Of course, every part of Bible has significance. So it must be really important. And indeed, Peter, in his second letter, says that this is really shows the validity of the gospel. It is not a story that just we made up, but something that I saw very clearly. So for Peter himself, the leader of the apostles, it was very important. So let's see why it is important. This Mark's account starts with the time frame, 6 days later. It is not very common for Mark to really specify exact time compared to what happened before. So there must be good reason why Mark is talking about this. Then we have to go back and say 6 days after what? And it was after Peter confessed that you are Christ. Jesus asked, "Who do you say I am?" And Peter said, "You are Christ." And 6 days later, this event happened. So this event is connected to this confession of Peter. And 6 days have passed because it is a good time really to sink in what you said. So thinking what he said really sink into the minds of all the disciples and himself as well. Although he confessed, maybe he wasn't really reflecting upon it as much. So 6 days is good time as it's almost a week, and maybe 6 days later really means 1 week later. So this shows that this event is really confirmation of what Peter said. And it happened on the top of a very high mountain, it says. Well, mountain has really significance in the history of Israel. And especially when Moses received the law, the 10 Commandments, actually what we read in the time of confession, and other laws, he just went up to the Mount Sinai, or called Mount Horeb as well. He went up there. And when he went up there to receive actually what God said, there was a kind of 6 days of waiting period. So 6 days has that significance as well. So this is really to show that this incident has connection with the time before, the time of Moses. And what he saw there at the top of the mountain was glory of God. So this is to show glory of God, that Jesus went up there. And he took only Peter, James, and John. And again, this is connected to this incident of Moses. Because when he went up there, it was Moses alone who went up there. And Joshua went up halfway, but only Moses went up to the top of the mountain. And the reason is because God is so pure and people are impure. God doesn't really show his glory to all people, but only to the one that he selected. So Jesus is in tradition of this as well. Jesus is showing only to his glory only to Peter, James, and John at this time because of people's impurity. Yet, at the time of Moses, it was just one person. Here, there are 3 persons. Because he wants to really make this a make them to be strong witness. If only one person claims, we saw Jesus transfigured, maybe people might not believe. But 3 people will say, we saw this. And because of our impurity, this really is the way that we should believe in God's work. People of the time demanded that Jesus would show the sign from heaven, like this, something like this. But Jesus didn't show this to everybody, but only to 3 people. Because we are to believe in the witnesses of people who are close followers of Jesus. And that's the way Jesus set up. That's why Bible is really a very important book, because it is based on the witnesses of these close followers of those who saw what happened. So Jesus is showing this to 3 people so that we may believe on the witnesses of these 3 people. And Jesus was transformed or transfigured, if we use the common word, church calendar words. And his clothes were amazingly bright. And this, again, his clothes amazingly bright than any bleachers can make, really shows that he is the kind of a glory that God shows to his people in the time before Jesus, in the time of the Old Testament. God really shows his glory in what's called theophany, just showing his glory, although God is invisible, showing himself somewhat visible. That's what theophany is. But this time it is different, because God's theophany in the Old Testament was just showing his God's glory in forms of what looks like a vision. But this time, the glory was shown in Jesus, in the person of Jesus. And the glory of God is in Jesus. Full glory of God is in Jesus. This is to show that Jesus himself is God. He is the Son of God, and he is divine. So Jesus himself is showing himself as God in this transfiguration. Then at the time Elijah and Moses appeared, Elijah and Moses representing the whole history of Israel, the whole time of Old Testament. And these are specifically chosen because they are the ones who saw God's glory very closely. I talked about Moses already, going up the Mount Sinai and seeing God, as it is described, face to face. And Elijah, interestingly, on the same mountain, saw God's glory when he was fleeing from King Ahab and talked with God. So these people who saw God's glory is now here to witness Jesus' glory. And there's another reason, I think, why Elijah and Moses are chosen, because Elijah and Moses are connected to the promise of Messiah. Moses said, God will raise up a prophet like myself, and that people of Israel usually accept this as a promise of Messiah. And Elijah didn't say something like that, but Malachi said, Elijah will come. And people just thought this as Elijah comes before the coming of Messiah. So these are connected to Messiah. So by Moses and Elijah appearing there, they are really affirming that Jesus is full of God's glory because Jesus is God, and also affirming that Jesus is really the promised Messiah. Jesus just didn't appear out of nothing, but he is the culmination of all the history of Israel leading up to that point, and all the promises that really promised the Messiah, the new king, will come. And Peter, seeing this glory, says, it's good that we are here. Let's make 3 shrines for you, for Elijah, and for Moses. And Mark's comments on this is he didn't know how to respond. So basically, he didn't know what to say. He didn't know a thing. Is what Peter, what Mark is saying. So we shouldn't really take his suggestion seriously. But there must be still reason why Mark wrote this. These words. It is to show how awe-stricken he was, how just surprised he was, how he amazed or elated he was. He just says he was so amazed that says, it's good for us to be here. And indeed, Mark describes it even more by saying, for the three of them were terrified. And word terrified here doesn't really mean that you are terrified that you will die or something, but they are just so terrified because this vision was so strange or so glorious that they couldn't just stand in front of them without really thinking of something. Or in Peter's case, without saying anything. That's what happened. That's how glorious this occasion was. Then it says a cloud overshadowed them. And this again shows is parallels with the Moses' experience of mountaintop, because at that time, that for 6 days of the time, the cloud overshadowed the mountain. The people would not see Moses from the bottom of the mountain. And by showing this glory of Mount Horeb, God is really affirming that this is really my doing. It is the glory of Jesus is actually my glory. In other words, God the Father is affirming God the Son. And he's not only affirms with his action, but with his words as well. Because it says, this is my Son, whom I dearly love. Listen to him. And we read these words last week as well. This is my Son whom I dearly love. And that's really the affirmation of Jesus' divinity. That Jesus is God's Son. We read it on the scene of his baptism. But there's one more thing added here, which says, listen to him. Listen to him is a command. So at Jesus' baptism, when God said, this is my Son, he wasn't sure who he was speaking to, but you are my son. Maybe he was speaking to Jesus himself. But here, he's really speaking to Peter, James, and John. Listen to him. And if they will witness this to other people, he's really speaking to all Christians. Listen to him. If Jesus is really the Son of God, our duty is to listen to him. We are to obey him. And after that, it says, suddenly looking around, they no longer saw anyone with them except Jesus. So it just went back to normal, because now is the time to go back to normal life. This big incident was to show Jesus' glory and to strengthen their faith. But it is not so that they will just dwell in this and live on the mountaintop. They will have to go down and live the usual life after this. And as they were going down, Jesus ordered them not to tell anyone what they had seen until after the human one had risen from the dead. Here, human one is the way that Jesus referred to himself. And Jesus says not to tell this to everyone. And why would Jesus then show this to Peter, James, and John if they are not going to tell anyone? And why is the account written here? But Jesus didn't say it not to tell anyone anytime, but it says until after the human one had risen from the dead. So this shows the transfiguration is closely related to the resurrection. The resurrection that saves us, Jesus' resurrection that saves us, is really prefigured by transfiguration. So Jesus wants them to confirm their faith by telling this story after the resurrection, because at the resurrection time, Jesus will show himself to more people, to 500 people. So when people are more clear about who Jesus is, then to strengthen their faith, Jesus is Jesus orders them, these 3 disciples, to say, then tell other disciples and other followers that, oh, okay, we know that this should happen because we knew there was a time of transfiguration. Then their faith will be strengthened. So while the transfiguration is not really the maybe the basic part of our faith, it is the confirmation of our faith about who Jesus is. And that also shows, because they will say, oh, yes, there was something before that. Then resurrection is not something that happened only because after Jesus' death, God said, oh, maybe I should do something about this. But it was something that was planned from the very beginning. And when I talked about 6 days later, it was not just 6 days after that Peter confessed, but also Jesus started to talk about his death and the resurrection, because he said that right after. So this is really the confirmation of what will happen in the future, the resurrection. So we learned today that transfiguration affirms Peter's confession that you are Christ, and also the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So it is an important event, although it is not maybe essential thing of essential part of our faith. And what we learn from the transfiguration, what is affirmed, what is confirmed through this, is that Jesus is the Son of God. He is fully divine. And he is a coming Messiah that was promised in the Old Testament. Jesus isn't just a new phenomenon, but the culmination of what has happened. Promised King. And when I say what has happened, culmination of what has happened, indeed, God has prepared this event from the very beginning. He prepared Jesus' life from the very beginning, from eternity. And Jesus' kingship is really sealed with his resurrection, as our New Testament reading confirms, that we are saved through his resurrection. So transfiguration stands as a affirmation of what Peter said and as a prefigure of what will happen in the future. And what is our response? Faith, of course. We should fully believe in what transfiguration confirms, that Jesus is the Son of God and he is the King that was promised. And if he's the Son of God, he has this full glory of God. And of course, we have to obey, as God himself said. Listen to me. If Jesus is the Son of God, our response to him should be to obey him. So let us do that. Glory be to the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.